Hello friends, today let us discuss about hypothesis. Myself Kiran Menghani, research counselor, and today's topic is very unique from the viewpoint of understanding the purpose and types of hypothesis. Now when we talk about hypothesis as such, it is very much essential to understand first the purpose of hypothesis. Now why do we require hypothesis testing? It is to determine whether we have enough proof in favor of certain you can say assumption or belief, and also in upcoming slides the things will be clear why it is called as belief or assumption. Secondly, hypothesis is preliminary or tentative explanation, or we can say postulate by researcher of what research consider the outcome of investigation will be. So any kind of assumption or any kind of postulate which actually brings about the research parameters into discussion, all those things will be considered under hypothesis. Thirdly, it also indicates the expectation of the researcher regarding the variables. So we have different variables in research, like we have dependent variable, independent variable. So how they are related to each other, that is also one kind of, you can say, the justification or direction which hypothesis is oftenly giving. So when we talk about the definition of hypothesis, it is the tentative statement about the parameter which might go true or wrong, which might go right or wrong, which might go true or false. So when we analyze this word hypothesis, the hypo means tentative, and when we talk about the thesis means fact. So hypothesis, tentative fact. So what is the difference between hypothesis and a problem? See, we do have research problem also, we do have research hypothesis also, and we do include research questions also in research paper or research project for that matter. So both hypothesis and problem, they contribute to the body of knowledge which actually supports or refutes an existing theory. And hypothesis will be different from the problem, and problem is basically formulated in the form of questions. So it gives you can say interrogative form of basis for any kind of research. But hypothesis, this provide the suggested solution to the problem. So in upcoming slides we are going to also see what are the different types of hypothesis and how we can differ problem from the hypothesis. Also, when we talk about the problem, we can't directly test the problem. We have to test first the hypothesis. So when is an hypothesis formulated? Why do we need to formulate hypothesis? This is the very peculiar question, or this is the first question which should arise in the mind, because basically in all kinds of research what we have seen that after objectives we do have hypotheses which are being based on the objectives of research. So hypotheses are formulated after we understand the problem of the research, and then we take into account the literature study also. And it is also formulated when researcher is aware about the theoretical and empirical background of that problem. So for that matter, we can say that hypothesis comes directly from the theoretical background also, and it comes from the practical applications of that particular research when it is talked about or sought out in the form of a question or a problem. So purpose, what is the purpose and function of hypothesis? So it is offering the explanation of relationship between the variables, which we are going to see in terms of classification of different hypotheses. It furnishes the proof that researcher has sufficient background knowledge. It gives direction to the investigation, and it structures the next phase in the investigation. So say for example, if we have hypothesis, common sense hypothesis, if we have certain assumption, whensoever we talk about the earth structure, many people believed before the invention of technology that the earth is round in shape or spherical in shape, or it is rectangle in shape. But once the technology part has proved it that earth is spherical in shape, all those postulates and assumptions which are there that earth is triangle or rectangle are actually defeated. So in that case we can understand that whatsoever assumptions we are taking, these are being empirical tested, and then it gives the further direction for investigation. And qualitatively or quantitatively, we can also talk about that these hypotheses are producing certain theories. So what could be features and characteristics of hypothesis? So to name a few, it has one direction giving power. It should strive to furnish an acceptable explanation of any particular problem. It has to be verifiable. It has to be formulated in a very simple, understandable terms, and it should correspond with the existing theory or knowledge, domain of knowledge which is there. So talking about the features, it is giving direction, it is giving the acceptable explanation, it is being tested through statistical analysis and tools, and simpler. It has to be simpler so that it can be understood in layman language also, and it has to go hand in hand with the existing theory. So we have different types of hypothesis. For that matter, very first we have descriptive hypothesis. Now when we talk about descriptive hypothesis, such hypotheses just describe the phenomena. They describe the characteristics such as size, form or distribution of variable, and that variable may be object, person or organization. So say for example, if we are talking about developing countries, we oftenly talk about and compare developing countries in contrast to the developed countries, and we talk about that poverty, literacy, unemployment are more, or the rate of economic problems, socio-economic problems are more among developing country as compared to developed countries. So in that case, what we are doing, we are actually describing the variable in terms of size, form and distribution. So the very example which is given here is that the rate of unemployment among developing country is higher than that of that in developed country. Second one, if we talk about the relational hypothesis. Now when we talk about the relational hypothesis, they are describing the relationship between two variables. So when we talk about the relationship between two variables, we oftenly stick to two particular events or two particular phenomena. So we have families with higher incomes, they spend more on recreation products. So here we are talking about the upper class and middle class. So when I talk about the public sector banks are performing better than private sector bank, what we are trying to do, we are trying to give the justification to the relational hypothesis, wherein we see the support of government to public sector banks rather than to private sector banks, which are actually running on their efficiency and management part. So here also, if we talk about the upper class people have fewer children than lower class people, we are directly or indirectly, what we are going to do, we are actually relating one particular event or one particular entity with other in terms of one basic characteristics. Then when we talk about the causal hypothesis, so causal hypothesis, we oftenly see that there is one variable which is considered as independent variable and the other is considered as dependent variable. So when we talk about the first variable, that will be having the cause and effect relationship with the other variable. So in that case, which is cause and which is effect has to be determined in terms of two variables which are having the cause and effect relationship with each other. So when I say that advertisement impacts sales, advertisement increase sales at that particular moment of time, I am trying to justify that my increase in sales is because of advertisement. So in that case, sales increase in sales is effect, and the cause is the expenditure which is incurred on the advertisement. Then we have fourth particular hypothesis type, which oftenly goes in hand with alternate hypothesis, that is working hypothesis. Now working hypothesis will be assumption which will be carried forward in the research till you have certain modification as the investigation proceeds. So while planning any study of a problem, the hypotheses are formed, and basically all hypotheses are formed on one basic rule, that they are going to serve as the working hypothesis unless and until they are tested and verified. So in that case, that could be considered as working hypothesis. Next one we have null hypothesis. Now, why null and alternate hypothesis are two sides of the same coin? Because we have in null hypothesis, we are showing that there is no relationship between two particular variables, and then alternate we are going to show that there is a relationship between family's income, as in this case, and expenditure on recreation. So what happens in this case, that when we are showing there is a relationship between two particular variables, it becomes the alternate hypothesis, and when we show there is no relationship between two variables, it becomes the null hypothesis. So I said that it is the we can say two sides of the same coin. Then sixth one we have statistical hypothesis. Now, why do we call any hypothesis as statistical hypothesis? Wherein we are considering the two samples out of one statistical population. So what we are going to do, what we are going to justify, or we are going to measure two groups, and we are going to numerically measure those two groups in terms of one particular dimension, and we are going to state that this particular sample is larger or older or younger, for that matter any example can fit into this particular thing. Then the group B. So if I talk about the male female gender based hypothesis also, when females are inclined towards shopping better than males, then I can say that I am using the statistical hypothesis part. Next one is common sense hypothesis. Now, when I talk about common sense hypothesis, it is very empirical uniformities which are perceived during day-to-day observation. Whatever we observe during the day and whatever are the common sense which actually reflect in our mind are captured in this particular classification of hypothesis. So when we talk about that employees with less perks, they have less motivation. When we talk about that people who eat more are more obese, that particular time we are talking about the day-to-day observation or day-to-day phenomena which is happening, which is striking in our mind as common sense. Then we have complex hypothesis. If there is presence of more than two or three you can say dependent or independent variables in one particular statement, then we can talk about then we can relate this particular thing as the complex hypothesis. So when I give example like increased demand creates higher prices, it creates shortages in the market, it develops inflation in the market. What I am trying to do, I am trying to relate that this particular increased demand is actually creating n number of other you can say dependent variables, independent variables. So that particular time this particular statement becomes complex hypothesis. And lastly we have analytical hypothesis. So analytical hypothesis, they are forming the relationship and they are having the highest level of abstraction, I can say. So it always specify the relationship between the changes in one property and changes in another property, but it is very much abstract in nature. It has to be measured with the help of you can say scale or score card. So when we talk about that music impacts psychological well-being, what we are trying to do, we are trying to relate music with the psychological well-being, and we are going to measure the psychological well-being after the population or sample is exposed to music listening. So that particular time this particular thing becomes the analytical hypothesis. So considering the other factors like what will be features or characteristics of good hypothesis. So a hypothesis can be considered as very good and best in terms of you can say empirical testing. When it is having conceptual clarity, it is specific in nature, we can put it into test. There are availability of statistical techniques to test it, and it is going hand in hand with the theory. It is consistent enough, it is having objectivity, that means it is carrying certain variables, and it is simple, or you can say it is having the gist of simplicity. Also, when we talk about what are the sources of hypothesis, where these assumption and hypothesis comes from, so they come from the already developed theories, they come from day-to-day observation, they come from analogies. Where what is analogy? When we are trying to relate one thing with the other in terms of cause and effect, you can say it comes from your personal experience, it comes from your intuition part, it comes from the findings of past researches and review of literature. It is depending upon your state of knowledge. As I rightly said that people used to consider that earth is having different shape other than sphere. It comes from the culture also many a times, because in culture we have different demographic variables like gender, age, or we can say subculture, caste. They do have different value propositions, and it comes from the continuity of research. That means past research or review of literature also reflects certain hypotheses which we take ahead for again into our sample testing. So this is all about the hypothesis. So what we have learned about the types of hypothesis with certain example. We have seen the hypothesis statement, and also we have seen that why do we need hypothesis in a study. So characteristics and sources. Thank you very much.